It's even worse than saying like, yeah, man, just work hard and you can be an NFL player. You know, it's like there's even less of us than that. You know, people do a lot of drugs around here, and like I don't know, with your military background and everything, I just want to make sure you're cool with drugs and stuff. And I was like, all right, don't be too optimistic, you know.
If you want to be successful, you have to believe that, and you have to like have that just relentless, almost stupidity.
Nobody else is listening to these records being like, you know, I noticed a very distinct quality drop off in the last 6 months. Have you switched engineers or no, nobody does that. That kind of stuff. I'm like, oh my God, that sounds awful. Cool, I'll be there so soon, man. I'm on my way.
That sounds dope. Sign me up. I'll do it free. I'll pay you to do it. Today's guest is Los Angeles-based recording engineer and mixer Wil Greazy Wil. Wil has worked with a list of artists too long to even try to fit in here, but we'll throw some names out. We've got Killer Mike, Vic Mensa, Imagine Dragons, Frank Ocean, X-Ambassadors, The Greatest Showman, and Ariana Grande. He's also become the de facto TikTok engineer by amassing a following over 50,000 people just by sharing real-world experiences and calling out some of the nonsense. So if you've seen his videos or you've met him, you know this is going to be a good time. Welcome to the show, Wil Got. What's up, man? How are you?
I'm great, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, dude, this is going to be a fun hang. I feel like you and I have had a lot of parallel experices in this business, so we're going to have a good time. Hopefully other people also enjoy it. So I'm kind of in the mood to just go straight for the tangents here.
Sure.
We'll come back around to your story and start this out normally.
Look, I'm going to tell you the truth is when my string gets pulled, I just keep going forever. So, you know, you're going to have to entertain this circus a little bit more than you normally have to, I'm sure.
Yeah, well, we're going to leave it all in. It's going to be a party. So you and I have had similar experiences. Like I mentioned, we came up in studios around the same time. I think we're about the same age. Do you
did the same stuff at times?
That's right. Do you think we're like the last generation of like big studio engineers? Like, is that game changing? Is it over?
Ooh, it's not over, but it is getting real limited for sure. You know, it's funny to see, you know, going back to East West, I still work there all the time, you know, and it's because of my allegiance to Candace there that I've had such a good career. So I always go back to East West. And I also take it upon myself to train these guys at East West that are coming up now. And so they do exist, but it's definitely getting further and farther between each class of good engineers coming up, you know?
Yeah, even the sessions in those studios are different now. Like the budgets are different. There's so many great records being made, you know, at home studios.
When I first started off, the Chili Peppers were on month 4 of 7 at East West.
Exactly.
You know, they had booked out 7 months of a studio. You know, that's just something that is so rare to happen now that you almost never see anymore.
Oh no, like a week is a long session. At least that's my experiences in the last, you know, or pre-pandemic. I don't get to many studios post-pandemic. I've holed up in my backyard. Yeah, man, it's just different game. The assistants, I feel like they're getting cheated a little bit out of like what you and I got to experience, especially you at East West when you were doing all those sessions. So yeah, man, I don't know. And any word of advice for a kid that's about to want to jump into the studio?
Man, it's so hard because I get that people ask me that all the time, especially with TikTok. People will be like, "Well, what if?" And it's hard because it's even worse than saying like, yeah, man, just work hard and you can be an NFL player. You know, it's like there's even less of us than that. And there's a lot of people that want to do it. So it's hard to be like, hey, man, here's what I would do if I was in your position, because we hit into the industry. I mean, I was told by an engineer when I first started, the tech at East West, actually, who was like, you know, a bit of an asshole or whatever. But he literally said to me, like, what are you doing in this industry? It's dead. You're not going to have a job in 5 years. And I was like, I don't know, man. Like, I think I'll still be employed in 5 years, but we'll see, you know? And he was kind of prophetic about part of it because it is harder now for sure. It is definitely a lot. there's a lot less people doing it. There's a lot less jobs. There's a lot less ability for things to exist in this world. But also at the same time, I think it paralleled the way the studios went. It's like when we first got into this game, they were dying off so fast because Pro Tools came into the game, right?
Yep.
And you could now record from home, native on your laptop with, and the computing power was getting good. And all of a sudden it was like, oh, okay, well, studios are going to start dying off a little bit. And they did, but the really, really good ones are now the most important ones left. It's like they are essential to the creative process. So, it's like the real answer is be the best, and people will always want to work with you no matter what's going on. And that's what I strive to do in my own careers. I'm just trying to be the best ever. Like I anybody that's ever sat with me for more than 5 minutes knows that I think I am the best, and I'm working on being the best at all times. So
that's something that successful people need. Like, especially if you're an artist but anybody that's successful, there's an amount of blind belief. And I should preface this by saying, I'm not saying that you're not one of the best, but if you want to be successful, you have to believe that. And you have to have that just relentless, almost stupidity. Like when you make a mistake or something, you have to be like, fuck that doesn't matter. I'm better than that. You need it.
I definitely agree with that. And a lot of the artists that I work with, there's two things that the artists that I work with are very well known for. One is usually their political activism, and the second is usually their just blind faith in themselves. Like Killer Mike has said he's the greatest a million times. Like especially in the rap world, people will say, I am the greatest that has ever been, and it's very funny because like they are like Killer Mike is probably one of the greatest, he is up there with like one of the best. I mean, dude was on Outkast songs. Do you know how good of a rapper you have to be in an Outkast song, like, and still to this day gets features from 3 Stacks, it's like, you got to be really, really good for 3 Stacks to let you like use his voice on a song.
Oh yeah, yeah. I think you've done a lot more rap sessions than I have, but my experience in the rap world is when somebody is good, they're fucking good. Like it's a game changer. Like I would do so many writing sessions, and people get on the mic, and you're like, this is whatever, and then like somebody that's good gets on there and just goes to town, and you're just like, whoa, that's what it's supposed to sound like.
I feel like that. I mean, especially when you bring up the writing sessions, because I know we both came through that same camp of the Alex the Kid writing sessions, where you just have done like probably 8,000 of these writing sessions. And I did so many of them, and they were just pulling people off of SoundCloud at one point in time to just be like, let's see if this person like does well with this. And then one day Julia Michaels walks in the studio, sits down, and is like, the best you've ever heard, and it's like, holy, this girl knows how to write a song. Like she is just top to bottom. She has everything it takes to make this song perfect. So
super talented, super talented.
Yeah. I've definitely gotten to see both sides of that coin in the same way that you have, where it's like, oh man, this person is an absolute clown. And like, how did they even get into this building? And then the other side of like, wow, this person's good.
Yeah. I always found it was the people that just got signed, or like, had 5% of something that was big and just got their pub deal. Those were the ones that were really challenging to work with. And the more successful and more famous, generally the more enjoyable the day was, just all around. Like everybody was a better hang, everybody was super skilled, but
it's funny you say that. When you said somebody who just got signed, you reminded me of this guy who came in one time when I was just starting to do engineering sessions at like East West and stuff. Like it was pretty early in my career, and I hadn't had to deal with somebody like this before. And this guy comes in, he's young, he's like 20, 21, something like that. And he's in the booth, and he things are going pretty good. And then all of a sudden he just starts being like, hey, turn my fucking EQs up, bro. And I was like, what? And he said, turn my EQs up. And I was like, those are all words. You're saying words, but they don't mean what you think they mean, I don't think. you know.
Yeah. It's, do you have a-
So I just made it. I just turned the whole thing up. I was like, all right, all your EQs have been turned up. All the frequencies, you got them all, man. Congratulations.
yeah, I've had I've been at the edge of losing it several times on some of those writing sessions, and you know, people are like, yeah, I'm not going to get into it, but you've been there, you know the feelings. You're just
Yeah,
like, fuck, I can't
yeah,
believe this is.
absolutely. Well, yeah, I also know that there was it was like almost no time after starting working for Alex a Kid that I was like, cool, yeah, you guys just let me know. I'll be out in the lounge if you need anything, you know, and like call me whenever you're ready to record some shit, and then I'll come in. But like I couldn't take it anymore to just like sit there and like go through all those sessions, and like, you know, there's certainly a time in this industry where you have to make some decisions for your own sanity, and that was like doing 10, 12 hour sessions every day was getting a little old for me.
Yeah, yeah, and the writing sessions, you know, they're you meet a lot of people, but never for very long. Everything's fleeting. Most of the things you
Yeah.
record get replaced. It's
Yeah. Yeah. It's and you won't get credit for anything on it anyway. So it's not helping your career in any way, shape, or form. Except for the one thing, you know, what I was doing during the Alex the Kid times for me is, first off, they always showed up late, right? So it's like
always.
every day I came in and I sat down at the piano and I just started learning scales, you know, because I couldn't play piano at all. So I just sat down and I would just like practice scales and like learn. And that was actually how I first learned how to figure out the key of a song so that I could get the autotune setting right and
Yep.
everything. So it was like, oh, okay, this is a good way to do it, you know, because I know how other people do it. They look for like the tonal center and everything and they can just hear or whatever. But for me, I had to train. So I did. And that's what I spent my time getting, you know, when I was waiting on people, or people were just, I'd practice guitar, I'd learn a new song, or, you know, like do all that stuff. And I just kept myself constantly progressing. And that's, you know, while I look at it, I'm like, well, it did nothing for my career to be there, but it did do a lot for my ability. So
Yeah, when you get separated from something that maybe didn't seem like a good idea at the time, you get a couple years down the line and you're like, oh, you know what? I got a lot out of that. Not what I thought I was
yeah,
going to get, but something different.
yeah.
So, um, well, we could obviously keep going, but we got to try to do the podcast, you know, format a little bit. What was your start in music like? How'd you get sucked into this thing?
In the very beginning, you know, this is like, you know, I'm like maybe 10, 11 years old. You know, I always wanted to play music as a kid. You know, I was constantly asking, and it was really frustrating to know that my parents knew that about me and never once gave me that. You know, it's like I was always asking for a guitar. I wanted to play a guitar my whole life, and they never got me one until I was about maybe 11 or 12 years old. I just mowed lawns and worked until I could afford one. I just bought my own guitar, you know, and it was a shitty classical acoustic guitar, and I was embarrassed to have it because you know, it was like all my friends had Fender Strats, and I was like playing this like old wide neck acoustic classical with nylon strings and everything. You know, I still have that acoustic. I still have that classical, and I use it on records all the time now. And
Awesome.
every time I pull it out, people are like, "Yo, that's amazing." It wasn't until I became an engineer, you know, like 28 years into my life, that I finally started being like, "Man, this thing's cool as hell." So I started like that. I started wanting to do that, but at the exact same time, my grandfather was an electrician. He worked for the mines in Pennsylvania. He was a safety inspector for like the mines. And
Oh
as a
shit.
little kid, one of the ways that I would make some money every now and then is my grandfather would take me out to the mines with him, and we would do like ground resistance, because like everything terminates into the ground, right? So it's like, you know, like for safety reasons, you have to make sure that when like electrical stuff in a mine terminates into the ground, it dissipates within a certain, you know, distance or whatever, you know, because it is still like that earth ground still going into, so that it doesn't just disappear when it hits the ground.
Right.
So we would
right.
be out there and we'd test the resistance along the ground and make sure that, you know, like the electrical is like dissipating properly in all these places. And that's how I learned about electricity and cables. And then you know, I got out of the military. I talk about this a lot. I was in the military, you know, fought in the Iraq War and everything, got shot. And then I got out of that and I was like, looking for something to do. And I moved down to Texas just because it was cheap to live there. I'd never been there before in my life. We just moved there on a whim. And I started playing in a band, and the band did pretty good. We got to a point where we had some good fans, and like we were making a record and everything. And I was in the studio. I'd never made a record before, done anything. I had no idea what this guy was doing, but I did think it was pretty interesting. And then hilariously, at some point in time during the making of this record, this guy just pulls out a meth pipe and starts smoking it. And I was like, and he's all, "You want some?" And I'm like, "No, I'm good,
I'm
thanks."
good on the
And
meth.
he's like,
Thanks, though.
But I did remember thinking, like, this guy's on meth and he can do this. Like, this seems like an easy job, maybe. And so the band ended up. We had a real. It was actually during that process, our guitarist went to go get some CDs to burn the copy of our record onto it, and he got into a car accident and he went into a coma. It was like literally we were in the studio when it happened. He went into a coma. He did eventually come out of the coma and like whatever. But it was like he was a long road to recovery, and he and I had basically done everything together. So I was like, man, I have nothing that I can do right now. Like I don't want to. I can't believe I thought this, but I was like, man, I'm 25. It's too late for me to start another band. Like, I'm too old for that, lifestyle or whatever. And my daughter was just born, and I was like, I need to get something serious under my belt. And I was like, you know what? I think maybe I'll go to the conservatory in Phoenix. Like it was just a happenstance. I'd lost my job, and the band broke up, and my girlfriend at the time, my daughter's mother, she was from Phoenix, and she's like, why don't we move to Phoenix and we'll get and we'll be able to have my parents to help and all that. We'll have some support. I was like, okay. So we moved to Phoenix, and as we're moving to Phoenix, like in the process of like getting the house finished up in Texas and stuff, I started looking into audio schools, and I found there was one in Phoenix, and I was like, oh my God, this is fate. So I walked into the conservatory not having known a single thing about engineering at all. I couldn't use a Mac. I had no idea how to do anything. The only thing I knew was about like plugging in my bass. That was like the concept I knew was like, okay, plug it into here, and then it has to go into an amp, and then the amp goes into a speaker, and then that's like I remember definitely blowing out cabs, because I didn't like match impedance in any way, shape, or form. Whenever I was like in a band, I was just like, whatever, it's a speaker, it fucking works, right? Just plug it in, and and that's actually how I started learning about that kind of stuff, was fucking stuff up. And then having to fix it. And I was like, well, I can just buy a new speaker now that I blew this one. And then somebody's like, well, you should match the impedance on that one so that you can, when you buy a new speaker, you can just put it in there. I was like, what? Impedance? What's all that shit? So I remember going my first day at Crass, they have a this is how sound becomes in a computer. And
right.
I just got it. I instantly understood it. And people were saying like, literally like week one of Crass, people were calling me like the MVP of the class and stuff like that, and being like, oh, that's the guy that's gonna like succeed in the industry. Even teachers would like come to me and ask my opinion on stuff, and I was like, I literally just learned this like 3 days ago. Like, what are you guys talking about? Why are you asking me about this stuff? I have no idea how you think I'm that good at it. But once you get out into the industry and you start looking around, and you see the people that get into the industry, the talent level very quickly it becomes apparent. Like where somebody is, oh, that guy's going to be good, or that guy's going to be an assistant for 12 years, and then he's going to probably sell guitars at Guitar Center. Then after that, it's like you could just see it. It's always apparent to me, anyways. And so I got out to the industry, and luckily, I landed at East West. I wanted to go there so bad, but luckily I landed at East West. And when I did, then it became like just, I mean, there is certainly an up and down thing going through my career or whatever, but getting to East West definitely was okay, I'm going up now.
Yeah. Was it East West when you started there, or was it Cello?
No, it was East West. It had just reopened as East West. That was actually why I got in there, because this again, a Google search got me to East West. That's it. This is the only, my entire career is hinged on like 2 Google searches, you know, like all the success I've ever had has been just based upon 2 really efficient Google searches that one brought me to Crass and then 2 brought me to East West, because I literally just Googled studios in Los Angeles, you know, and Capital came up, and everybody's like, well, Capital doesn't take like interns, so that's not a thing. And
They did
NRG
not.
came up, and they're like, NRG doesn't take interns, and I was like, okay, well, there's 2 down. And then it was like United, East West, or, you know, like I think Conway maybe was like one of the other ones that I had first searched up and found. And if you looked at all 3 of those studios on like a, you know, an image search or like, you know, their website or whatever, you would definitely be like, oh, East West is the funkiest one of these ones, you know. And that's all it was. I saw East West, and no one was asking about it because no one knew it existed. It had just reopened, and it was
Yeah.
just perfect timing that I was like, dang, like I'm trying to go out to East West. And literally I asked our internship coordinator every time I saw him, I was like, well, what about East West? And they're like, well, they're not taking anybody right now, but I'll keep, you know, I'll keep listening for you. And if they say anything, you know, blah, blah, blah. And the day I graduated, the last day of school for me, the internship coordinator came in and said, hey, they just had someone put in their 2 weeks notice at East West. If you're interested, they're taking applications. And they're like, if you can be there by Monday, it was Friday, you know, if you could be there by Monday, you can interview with Candace. And I packed up all my stuff that night and drove to Los Angeles. And I got there, and Candace called me. Oh no, Candace's assistant called me Monday morning and was like, we know you're supposed to come in today. Candace is real hungover. Can you come in tomorrow? And I was like, I feel like this place is going to be all right. So I went and I interviewed, and I remember on my interview, she's walking around, she's taking me around the studio and everything. And she's like, and this is Greg Fiddleman. He's working with the Chili Peppers right now. Greg, this is Wil. I think he's going to be joining the team. He's real cool. And I was like, dude, Chili Peppers records in here, man? Like, what the fuck? And and I was just and then she took me up. This is the best. She took me upstairs, and she was like, look, we really like you. We think you're a good addition to the team or whatever, but just to make sure, like, you know, people do a lot of drugs around here, and like, I don't know, with your military background and everything, I just want to make sure you're cool with drugs and stuff. And I was like, all right, don't be too optimistic, you know. Like, don't answer this too optimistically. But I'm like, yeah, all right, yeah, I'm down with drugs. Drugs are fine, you know.
That's amazing. That's really good. So then you got hired and started right away then? When as soon as you got
Yeah,
to LA, you
yeah.
landed there? That's sick.
Yeah, I landed there. I was an intern. It was they brought me on specifically because East West was in its foundation era, you know, and there's a lot of messed up stuff there. If you can imagine opening your own home studio and how many things you're like, your first session, you're like, oh, I don't have this, I don't have adapters, and I don't have a ground lift, and I don't, you know, it was like it was that kind of stuff, but it was like on a major studio scale. So it was
Oh
like, you
wow.
know, all of Studio 3 was a mess. Studio 3 is the A range that they had, the Trident, and everything coming
Yeah.
out of the console in Studio 3 is pin 3 hot. And all the gear is pin 2 hot in that all the outboard gear is pin 2 hot. So no one had accounted for that flip going into the gear, and you just be plugging stuff in, and it would just disappear. It would just disappear because it would flip a leg going through somewhere, and there'd be no transformer to balance it, and it would just be gone. Just be gone. And so you'd be like, and then you'd tell the tech, and the tech, like I said, he was a kind of an asshole, but he would be like, you'd tell him like, hey man, you know, the signal disappears, and he'd be like, just put a Pultec on after it. And it's like, you don't have 40 Pultecs, man. I can't just put a Pultec after every signal that disappears in this room. You know, like that was the solution, was just like figure it out. And so when I was brought on, I was brought on with the concept of like, hey, we need somebody who's gonna like be a self-starter and see problems and fix them. And
Yeah.
that's what I did. I went to town on that studio. Like I can still go there to this day and look at things inside that studio and be like, oh, I did that and I did that and I did that. And the reason you can even use the Studio 3 room at all is because, I mean, like when I went in there, it was like, it was just random. There was nothing was in order on the outboard gear. There's 40, 50 pieces of outboard gear, and it'd be like JK3, and then the next one down would be RS37, and then the next
Oh my
piece of
God.
gear down would be, I was like, there was no logical consistency to anything because people would just move stuff around. They would just take gear out and swap it with something else, or or the consoles. Oh God, the consoles. No, there's the 80 channel Neve that's in Studio One.
Yeah.
80 channels across the board, and no one was keeping track of when like a pre or something would be bad on a module. They would just pull it out and swap it to a side that no one was using the mic pre's on.
All the way down to the end.
Yeah, down to the end. And so they're just swapping them out, and they're not even numbered. So no one's keeping track of like, hey, we've had this problem on 27 before, and it was something so simple as just going in with a label maker and putting a number on every single module, all the way across, so that you could sit down and be like, oh man, it's 27 again. This is the third time that's happened. Like, get it up to the shop and make, the tech fix it. So it was like these little tiny things that I was like just constantly on top of. And I was only at East West for about 3 weeks before they started throwing me in rooms and having me assist on sessions and basically thirding, like assisting the assistant it was my start. But it was like, they're doing these big string sessions. And back then the assistant ran Pro Tools all the time.
Yep.
So it was like, you came into the studio, you expected the assistant to run Pro Tools. Well, if it's a big string session, the assistant can't run Pro Tools, take food orders, fix mics, move, cables, run lines, do all the stuff at the same time. They got a lot of work to do. So I would come in and I would just see the assistant in there. Usually it was this guy, Jeremy Miller, who's a great engineer. And I would be like, Jeremy, I'm done at 4. Do you want me to just come in and help out whenever I'm done? And he'd be like, God, I'd love that, please. And so I started just staying. And then Candace found out that I was staying, and she was like, well, don't stay off the clock. If he needs help, just like stay on the clock. And so I was putting in all this extra time. Yeah, getting extra money, doing it and everything. And she never took advantage. Like she never takes advantage. She still takes interns at that place. And like, that's rare because a lot of people are like on the no free work thing and everything. But she doesn't waste your time, and she doesn't like expect you to work for free. Like, you come in, you do your internship, and that's like your college credit bullshit. That's different. But as soon as you're done, they don't bring on interns just for free work. They bring on interns with the expectation that when you're done with your internship, if you have met our expectations, you will be hired here and you will become an employee and you will make good money and be taken care of.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And that's how she was with me. She was always taking care of me. And she saw right away, she's good at that. That's her whole career. Her whole career is finding talented young engineers and nursing them to adulthood, and then they come back and book sessions and have, success. In the last like 2 or 3 weeks, I've seen 4 or 5 former East West assistants doing sessions at East West.
That's awesome.
Like, it's a pretty brilliant marketing strategy, if you ask me, to raise up. And she's been doing it since Jerry Finn. She brought Jerry Finn into the industry.
Yeah.
Like, she's been doing this a while, and with some real talented humans, and just nurturing and benefiting them to their greatness, and then they go on to do good things.
Yeah. Well, we were talking about studios changing so much, and that you call it a genius marketing thing. That's just the way that it was, and that's how studios stayed open. Like, people came up, you taught them to be great engineers, they moved on, they want to go back to the place that they learned at. When every time you do a gig, you probably call East West first, right?
Yeah, well, especially also because, again, genius marketing. When I was first getting going, when I was first bringing sessions over there, I would just tell her like, hey, Candace, I only have $1,000 for this session, all in, all I can do. And she would be like, okay, look, we have a half day thing in one. If you can take the second half of the day, it's all you, and she wins because she fills a space that's really hard to fill,
Yeah.
and I win because I get a cheap studio that's actually an amazing studio,
Totally.
And I, at the same time, is still to this day, like, I train her people. When they come into my sessions, I ask them questions. I tell them oh, hey, the secret to this console is this, and and like, oh, if you have problems, you have to do this thing, and like that knowledge gets passed back down the same
Yeah.
way it did to me at some point in time, and her assistants end up better for it. So it's like it's a symbiotic world to take care of each other in this thing, and that's why I am so. You'll see. I mean, especially for people who follow my TikTok, you'll see. I talk about East West all the time because they still doing it that way. It's like
Yeah.
a lot of studios lose that. They've lost that, that cycle. They lost that, hey, you got to take care of your people down here because they come back and do all this stuff. And East West hasn't lost that. And that's my favorite part about that place. It's got a great vibe. It's amazing. They're really good there.
Well, it's the only way to train people because like we were saying earlier, the sessions have changed. There's so many vocal sessions. You talk about how much time you spent waiting for people to finish writing when you're working with Alex. That's part of the reason I left Capitol is because I could see that everybody was coming in. Producers like, hey man, plug that vocal chain into my Apogee duet. And I'm like,
Right.
all right, here's my phone number. I'll be in the lounge tuning
Yeah.
vocals for somebody else double dipping right now.
Yeah.
So,
Absolutely.
you got to have people that have that band experience and just the varying, all the sessions out there that you've seen, that I've seen, that a lot of the other engineers in town have seen. That stuff's got to get passed down in one way or another. And if the sessions aren't happening anymore, you've got to let people pick your brains or yell at them on TikTok, So,
Yeah.
I wanted to do
I do
quick,
like. Oh yeah. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I wanted to do a quick breakdown of East West for our audience, and correct me if I'm wrong at any point. But East West is one of the classic LA studios. It was Western, right?
So it starts 1965. Bill Putnam, who everybody knows from Universal Audio.
Yep.
If you're a nerd like the rest of us are, Bill Putnam was in Chicago, and Frank Sinatra wanted to record out in LA. LA was just starting to pop then, as like the home of the celebrities and all that. So Frank Sinatra and Bing Crosby moved out to LA, and they wanted to have a studio out there. So they hit up Bill and said, "Hey man, come out to LA and we'll help fund you to build a studio out here." And Bill came out and he found this old grocery store that had also been a radio hall and had also been a brothel at one point in time. And they found this old radio hall, and he came in and he gutted the entire building and its sister beside, which was United. He gutted the buildings as much as he needed to make them what he wanted, and he converted it into some studios, and that became United, and Western was the complex. And East West is still famous for its echo chambers, and Bill had built these echo chambers upstairs, and United and Western had telephone lines running between them so that you could be all the way over in United and use the echo chamber in Western and all that stuff.
That's
awesome. And it was like, he's really brilliant. He did a lot of really crazy stuff. But looking at the building, it's very crazy because what he built in 1965 is exactly what is still there today as far as the rooms themselves,
Yeah.
But eventually, Alan Sides, who came up under Bill Putnam, the story
I didn't know
is...
that.
Yeah, Alan Sides came up under Bill Putnam. And also here, so Alan's still out there, so he can correct me if I'm wrong about this. But I heard that Bill Putnam took a vacation for the first time in his life, and Alan Sides bought everything out from underneath him. And when he came back, he was basically like pushed into retirement by Alan buying everything out from underneath him. So that sounds very Alan Sides to me. That definitely sounds very Alan Sides. I could be wrong, but
it does.
He turned the buildings into Ocean Way, and it was Ocean Way. The complex, both buildings were Ocean Way for a little while, and then eventually he sold East West to Rick Adams, who was a billionaire internet investor guy, and he bought the building and turned it into Cello, and it was Cello for a while, and Candace ran it when it was Cello.
Okay.
And then eventually somebody, I might be confusing two stories, so I love when people afterwards will be like, "You're an idiot, you have no idea what you're talking about, you're making things up." But the story that I understand it to be is that one day somebody hit a fire hydrant out front of the building, and the water came down through the roof, and it leaked and caused a big water issue in the building. And they weren't really making any money at the time. It was like the beginning of like the internet Pro Tools world and everything. They were starting to lose money. And so the billionaire Rick Adams, who owned it, was like, walked away and
Gotta
just
go.
declared bankruptcy for the building, and everybody, you know, John Bryan was there. There's a story about John Bryan and Don Was and Candace and a whole bunch of people like just hanging out in Studio One at the last day because they basically were like, hey, come and get your shit right now. Everybody's got to get out. The building's over. And they all sat in Studio One and like cried and drank and, you know, like what you do when you lose a place. You know?
Yeah.
Cried and drank and made songs for the last time, and that was the end of East West, or so we thought, you know. And then it went into bankruptcy, and it just sat there empty for a few years. Well, not empty. All the consoles were still there. All the microphones were still there.
That's wild.
You could have just walked into East West and walked out with an 8028 if you needed one. You could have just gone in and grabbed an 8028, just loaded it up and taken it out, maybe module by module, but it sat empty for a few years, and then Doug Rogers, who built the East West string libraries with Nick Phoenix, who does the Quantum Lab stuff. They were doing really successful stuff. And the story of Doug Rogers is actually amazing because how it's been related to me. Again, correct me if I'm wrong, Doug. But nothing but love to Doug because he saved a historic landmark, and I love him. He's always around. He's still, you know, in the studio or whatever. But he basically had the first commercial CD burner in like LA. And that's how the string libraries or all that stuff started. Was they were doing like sample libraries of drums. They got Bob Clearmountain to record drums, and the real success story came whenever they put those on CDs, because he was the first person with a commercial CD burner or access to a commercial CD burner or whatever.
Oh shit!
And he could reproduce thousands of these CDs in no time. So he was just sending out CDs with these really good Bob Clearmountain drum samples on them and made a bazillion dollars off of it. And so he bought East West as, you know, as a bankrupt building, hired Philippe Stark for some crazy $15 million sum to come in and redecorate the entire thing. And to his credit, he didn't let anybody touch the studios. You can do anything in the whole building. They gutted the whole place because it used to look like the way United looks now, where it's like the wood walls and the classic old school studio bullshit.
Right.
And then Philippe Stark came and decorated it in the style of early fuck, you know, and then now it is what it is, you know, and it's just glorious. And again, that's what attracted me to East West in the first place, was the guitar desk pictures and the, you know, it's like I never went there, but I saw on the internet they got pictures of guitars, and they got of desks carved into guitars and all this stuff, and or guitars carved into desks. Sorry, I got a message on my thing and I got distracted because I got like ADD, like I'm like what the hell was that?
What's that?
I fucking lost. Yeah. So anyway, so, you know, I saw this crazy studio that was decorated all insane, and I was just like, wow, I really want to see what this is all about. And then so that's how it got my interest to come there in the first place. It does that for other people too. Like that's why, you know, you get these really high profile artists remembering and seeing this stuff and coming in and being like, oh yeah, man, like I've seen this video, I've seen this in so-and-so's music video, or because they do a lot of music videos, they do all sorts of stuff there. It's a studio that like doesn't say no to a gig. They filmed American Idol there. They filmed The Voice there. They filmed, I mean, I've been on a dozen reality TV shows that were filmed there, you know. People used to always spot me all the time, just like on like a, you know, on like some, like I was on that, there was this guy, what was his name? Dietrich Haddon. He's like a mega preacher guy. And he had a reality TV show that was like the Preachers of LA or some shit like that, you know? And
yes, I think I remember this.
I was on that show, like as his engineer in the thing, you know, like pretending to engineer.
Amazing. That's awesome.
People used to always catch me like that. It was hilarious.
That's awesome. So I did want to ask you, you know, now that we've gone through the history of East West, you moved up really quick. Do you think there's like any traits or personality? Like, why do you think you moved up that fast?
You know, perfect storm stuff. It always happens in the industry. I think where it's like that's exactly what it felt like for me. It was a perfect storm. I got there when they needed somebody to do those types of things, but also I'm the type of person that like I just do stuff. If you need something done, I'm just gonna do it. Like you know, Candace is not shy about asking people to be like, hey, can you drive me and Paula to the bar tonight? You know, or like stuff like, and like I never said no. You know, like I don't. That world is like, you know, it's like when I moved out to LA, my family stayed back in Phoenix. You know, my newborn daughter and her mother, who was my girlfriend at the time, uh, later became my second wife, and then that didn't work out anyway. So so I moved out to LA, and I thought if I'm gonna be away from my family, if I'm gonna sacrifice, I'm gonna I'm gonna be the best. Like I can't sacrifice watching my daughter grow up and not have something to show for it at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I went into that mentality being like, I am going to live in this studio. I was sharing a 1-bedroom apartment eventually. At first, I stayed with a friend from like the first month or whatever. He let me crash on his couch. Much love to Jordan. He's great. And then me and two of my friends, Rob and Kyle, we moved into a 1-bedroom apartment in the Valley. And they were both engineers. Rob worked at some private studio on Los Feliz, and Kyle worked at Rodney Jerkins' place. He was working at what's it called, Dark Child or whatever.
Yeah.
And so none of us were home. You know, it's like we had a 1-bedroom apartment, and we basically were. We had 2 air mattresses and a couch, and and whoever was the last person to come home slept on the couch, and the other 2 people slept, and we just rotated out the entire time. And it was just like, if I'm gonna be here, like that's what I'm living in, that's what I have as a home. I might as well go crazy, you know. I might as well be in the studio, and East West being one of those places. East West will never tell you to go home. They'll never be like. They'll never be like, yeah, go home. You need a break or whatever. So I just lived in the studio. There was a time, there was a 2-week period actually, after I moved out of that apartment with Rob and Kyle. There was a 2-week period that I lived at East West.
That's amazing. That's good.
I just slept there every night, and nobody even noticed that I was living there.
Because you're already there all
upstairs.
the time anyway. So it's
yes.
And there's probably showers. Every studio's
like,
got showers.
They did at the time. They don't anymore, but they did at the time have a shower. And it was like, man, I'm living here. Nobody noticed. I was just staying there. And like, because it was like I was gonna close the building anyways and probably open the building too. So like, and me and Andrew Masters, we just lived in the studios. Like no one, every single day a session would get done, and we just go into the studio, be like, hey, they finished in 2. Is it cool if me and Andy just pop in there after we're done working? And she'd be like, yeah, sure, whatever, just clean up, whatever. And so we did. We used anything that we wanted to use. Like I found out that studios don't do that, and I was like, why
really.
not? Like, why would you not want your assistants and your runners like in the studios all the time? Why wouldn't you want them behind the console constantly? We find problems, like everything we found, like anytime there was something messed up, if we couldn't fix it, we put in a report for it, so it got, taken care of. We found so many issues before the sessions, before Jim Scott comes in and is like, why the fuck doesn't this work? Me and Andrew were in there finding out that it didn't work, and we would we'd just be like, all right, cool. And we fixed so many things because it was like, well, we want to use this, so we have to fix this. If we don't fix it, we can't use it. So we would just fix stuff. We fixed, a lot of it was like maintenance. I fixed all of that the issue I was talking about in Studio 3. I fixed all of the pin 2, pin 3 hot thing. I fixed all the outboard gear. I put it all in a neat order and row and made it all consecutive, so it actually made sense and not just randomly placed. And I got rid of pieces of gear that I thought, like they had these old Ampex delays that were in there that like only worked like half the time, and like then they take up 4 or 5 units, space on the rack. So it's like, well, damn, we could get just a regular delay, and no one's using delays like this. No one is using this delay like this. There's no point in this 3 of these being in here taking up a whole rack, when no one is using these things. So I'd take it out. So anyway, all that to say is like it was a perfect storm for that place. I came at a time when they needed somebody to really step up and be extra and do extra stuff. Because Candace and Keith now is the assistant manager, but before it was Blake. Blake was Doug Rogers' son, and he was the assistant manager, and then he went on to run the software company, and then Keith Munson came in. Keith actually started under me, and I trained Keith to be an assistant, and also the other assistant too. That's there, Chaz. He's like the super assistant, been there for a long time. He literally has been there since I left.
Oh shit.
He said the other day, we were talking. He's like, man, he's like, I still have the first email you ever sent to me and I always look at it because it was like, hey, you stupid fuck. If you ever leave the room like that again, I'll beat the shit out of you. Like, it was like so heavy-handed and unnecessary.
Oh my
and it
God.
was like I was just, but I, it was like I was ex-military and I ex-marine, like, and a combat veteran, like, and I found a niche that was perfect for me. Now, people who know me now would be so surprised to learn how heavy-handed I was in the early days, because like I'm very like, yeah, fuck it, who cares, man? Like, fuck it, it's just a fucking, it's just making music. It's not rocket science or whatever, but back then, I was aggressive, I was mean, and I did not want anybody, like, if I was in charge, I was gonna run it like I was in charge, like I had no fear. And Candace loved it, like she would be like, she still tells me, she's like, hey, if you come in and just kick some asses and yell at people, and I'm like, that's not me anymore. I'm too lovey, too nice, Greazy Wil now.
That's amazing. I was going to ask, is it your time in the Marines obviously shaped a lot of your probably decision making in your life. Do you think
Oh yeah,
that get shit done at all cost attitude must have come from your military experience when you came out here?
a bit. It refined in the military for sure. I started understanding like there's leadership personalities. It's like my leadership personality now is like I just talking to my assistant about this because I take every now and then, very rarely, but I'll take an intern every now and then, to help raise them into the industry, right, and stuff like that. It's more, I call it mentorships more than like internships, because I'm not going to ask you to, do bullshit intern stuff. Right. I'm going to ask you to, like prep a mix for me, and then I'm going to teach you how to prep a mix for me, and I'm going to ask you to run Pro Tools on a session where I'm in there, and then I'm going to. So this was my point. So Braden, my young assistant, he ran Pro Tools for me yesterday, and he started off and he was nervous, and I lit him up. I got heavy on him, and I was, and it's like, and I do that because I know 100%, like, there's other people in the industry that will do that seriously. They're going to be mean. They're going to be, and also a tiny bit because it's so hard to watch somebody be bad at Pro Tools in front of you. It's like I'm just a little frustrated, but a lot of it because I think like, man, if you are Greazy approved, if you're going to go out into the industry and say, this guy taught me how to engineer, you better be ready to take a lot. You better be able to go through it, because I got yelled at. Jim Scott tore into me, and made me feel like an idiot. But then after the session, he was like, "Hey man, good job today," and like, I'm glad you're here because you're better than most type things, and like being kind to you and like helping you out and being like, "Hey, the reason I did that is because of this, and also because I lose my temper and shit." But I think it's really important to train like you're gonna fight. That's what they always say in the Marines, is like you sweat in training so you don't bleed in battle. And I think that's the kind of the mentality that I bring to a lot of this whenever I'm helping people come up, is that like you need to be able to be under pressure, because after engineering, running Pro Tools for me, you're going to be, you're going to be able to handle anybody else. And I have many, many former assistants who have worked for me who are doing very well in the industry, because I don't just like use them and, like, good luck, bro.
Just get rid of them.
If you do well, you do well in this industry. My list of former assistants who work or are like doing, One of them is Jeremy Inhaber, who used to work for. I got him a job working at Larrabee. Then he became Manny's mix assistant. Then he became Manny's ghost mixer, basically. And then he got passed around the industry a little bit. And then he just did Meghan Trainor's last album. He mixed Meghan Trainor's last album, so he's doing very well.
Good for
and
him.
Is having a good career. Another one of my assistants is working over at Interscope as an engineer. Another one of my former assistants is working for Jeff Ellis at East West and is doing really well. So like most of the people that I have come up under me, I take interest in their career. One of my former assistants is doing playback for Flo Milli. I got him into a world because I thought he's very good at engineering, but he needs a little bit of like real world experience. And I was like, and at the same time, one of my friends who does playback for a lot of artists was like, hey, I'm looking for some more people to train. I was like, you know what? This guy's really smart. He's really good. He's a little awkward around people. And this is a great job for him because he doesn't have to be around a lot of people and he can grow a little bit and like figure out his stuff. And that's exactly what happened. And now he's doing great. And I'm really proud of him. I sent him out to do a session with Vic Mensa recently. Nice. And Vic texted me to be like, hey, man, that guy's really cool. He did a great job. Ariana's great, you know? And I was like, cool, you know, like,
that's awesome.
And that's like a whole, you know, that's a whole thing for me. I think you gotta give back to the industry. You gotta help people come up because I came up like that, you know, and that's how it goes.
Yeah. Well, this is something that you kind of touched on that I wanted to ask you about is handling pressure in a session. Everybody's staring at you. And then kind of tied to that problem solving, right? Like as an assistant engineer and like somebody coming up through studios, problem solving is like mandatory. But I find that a lot of people shy away from that stuff. They immediately like text the person that had the job before them and it's like, hey, how do you do this? And you're just like, I don't have that job anymore. You need to figure out how to do that gig.
Yeah. You do understand that I figured it out when it was my problem, right?
Right, exactly. So you can also figure it out. Any thoughts on like how do you instill that into these kids that you're helping out? Because I feel like those are mandatory in this business.
Yeah, it's hard not to. This one of the things like it you know, it's a time-based thing because if I have the time to let them sit there and figure it out, you know, like because that's the hard part is like
true
is watching it and knowing how the solution is going to wind up and knowing what the solution is. But you can't necessarily just be like, you know, taking the reins every time and like and helping. Even at the, you know, at East West, whenever I go and there's an assistant, I will let them, you know, mess around for as long as I have the time to let them mess around. You know, when it starts to get to be where it's like, all right, now you're costing me session time and like I can't do this. You know, like this is what you need to do. Hurry up, go do it. You know, but most of the time I do try and let them, you know, make the connections because that's the best way to learn, right? Is if you figure it out and you understand and then you're like, oh, okay, I understand what's going on here. This is why I wasn't good at it. This is why I wasn't getting there. And then it forever in your brain. Like I will never forget some of the big mistakes that I've made, you know, sessions where it's like, you know, something went to complete shit because of a mistake. And I was actually telling my assistant this the other day, and because I sent him off on his own, I was like, what you're going to learn, the big things that you're going to learn is going to be, is going to be how do I make decisions that never paint me into a corner that I can always have an out for, you know, and a lot of my engineering is based upon being failure proof. You know, it's like, as I'm going through and like solving these things, it's like I've had so many of this issue that I'm just not going to go that direction anymore, you know? And it's like, well, I don't do that for a very specific reason because I got burned one time that way and I just don't go down that path anymore. I do it this way because this way keeps me from making those kinds of considerations and stuff. And my assistant said he did his first like tracking session on his own and he came back and he was like, man, he's like, that's exactly how it is. He's like, you just, at some point in time, you start making decisions being like, oh, I can't do that again. That was a big mistake. And it becomes your style. And so my style is, I don't like to get stuck in things. I don't like getting stuck in situations that are tough.
Yeah. No, that's true. I mean, it's if you're not learning from your mistakes, if you're repeating mistakes, especially if you have a job in a studio, you're getting fired. Like straight up. But
100%.
You get to make every mistake once in this business. I wanted to talk before we go on to our last questions. I wanted to talk about tracking engineers because I know you mix as well, and I know you do live. But but mainly you're a tracking engineer, right?
Yeah, I consider myself. Well, is there a follow up to this? Because I'm
Well, the
probably going to
follow up,
answer exactly what you.
yeah, the kind of the follow up is like the role of tracking engineer in 2023. Like, what's that look like versus like 10 years ago? What do you think are valuable things to focus on if you
Well,
want to be in a room recording people?
so for me, this is going to be a multi-tiered answer, and it's going to incorporate a little bit of my own personal philosophy. Because for me, all right, the tracking engineer is the most important part of all this stuff, and we've kind of diminished it a little bit because we now think of like tracking as being one microphone and a singer,
Yeah.
and then the producer's going to send some beats over, and you're going to. But me, I am still tracking like it's 1994. Like I'm still in there working. I first off, I'm well known for my drum tracking. So now people come to me specifically to track drums, and I do a lot of like bands and stuff like that. And I'm also diverse, so people know like, oh, like I actually, this is something I was talking about before. I was brought in on the Blonde sessions for Frank Ocean. I was brought in on the Blonde sessions because the engineer had never recorded drums before, and they needed somebody who could set all that stuff up and like do all that stuff.
Yeah.
And so I've been for a long time known for my ability to work on big sessions with that need like that sound. We need to get this drum sound, or we need to get this string sound, or this choir sound, or whatever, and being able to work with a lot of different instruments, even on the Killer Mike sessions. So that's actually a really good story. So to talk about all this, so Killer Mike came into East West, right, to do one session. He just came there because No Ideas next door at United, or was anyways. I don't know if he's moved since United shut down, but No ID was next door, and No ID typically doesn't really like having artists up in his studio all the time because one, it stops him from being able to do the other stuff. Two, they always smoke weed and like are rowdy, and it's a whole thing. And it's like Jay-Z and Guru and almost got into a fight with what's his name, Josh Homme from Queens of the Stone Age, because of me and Vic Mensa being loud and obnoxious in the studio multiple times before that, and then he got anyway.
I've heard that story unrelated to that. And somebody was like, I was here and I was anyway. So continue.
Yeah. That was my fault. I did that.
Congrats.
So anyway, Killer Mike came in for one session. That was all. He was just going to work on this one song and then, go back to Atlanta. And he came in, and that day we recorded a song off of his forthcoming album, which is going to be out real soon. It's been in the media, so I can talk about it now. But he did that one song, and when he got done at the end of the day, he's like, "Man, I can't go back to Atlanta to make this record. We don't have anybody like you there." He's like, this studio and you are just like a combination that I need." And so everything he would ask me, he'd be like, "Oh, hey, we want to do this. We want to do a choir." So, cool, man. I've recorded a choir before. Let's do this. We'll do this. We'll put these guys up. And we're in Studio 5, which doesn't have a very big live room. So I was like, fuck it. Let's record the choir upstairs in the VIP room. It'll be great. Like, it might be a little bit noisy. It might be a little bit shitty, but it's gonna be cool, like. And so we recorded the choir upstairs in the VIP room because it was the only place big enough to put a choir. And like, we recorded B3, we recorded guitar, we recorded bass, we recorded even some drums on that album. Like, we recorded everything live to go over top of No ID's beats, because that's how he does all of his production. It's like he makes a beat on the MPC or in Ableton or whatever, and then he tracks live musicians over top of it. And that's how you get that energy for like these big albums that he does, it's like, cause it's not just like a sample and all that bullshit. So,
right.
And Mike had never really worked with anybody like me. Like, he's doing stuff and he's like, "Hey, I want to try and sing this part, but I'm not a great singer." And I was like, "No problem. I'll just melodyne you." He's like, "You can melodyne too?" I'm like, "Yeah, I can do everything, man. Like, whatever you need, I can do." And they're just not used to working with people who, I mean, like, no doubt the Run the Jewels guys are really great and everything. They're all very talented and stuff. But, like, Mike personally is not in on that. That's like a lot of L does a lot of the production on that stuff. So it definitely is like Mike is more used to like the Atlanta style where it's like you show up to the studio, you sing into an 87, it goes into a CL1B, and you fucking probably, it's like it's like, and nobody touches the don't touch the CL1B, man. It's set, man. It's got settings, man. Don't touch it. So it's like to come into the studio and work with someone like me, and it was just an accident. They just showed up, and Candace was like, "Oh, Will's really good with like hip hop dudes and shit, and he'll probably." And it just so happened that I'd been working with Zach De La Rocha already for all the Run the Jewels stuff. So I had oh, hey man, nice to meet you. Like I actually did Zach's stuff on Run the Jewels. Like, oh man, you work with Zach. So I had an immediate credit,
Yeah, right,
and then,
right.
And then No ID comes into the studio the first day, and then he's like, oh, hey man, how's it going? He thought my name was Greg though, which was really funny because like I've known him for like 7 years, and he was just like, it's a G, right? Greg, it's got to be Greg, But then like the second day, and I didn't even correct it because you don't correct No ID, you just let him call you Greg, man. Just like keep going about your day. And then like the next day he came and he said, hey man, your name's Greg. It's Greazy. Sure is. Thanks, man. Glad you remembered me, though.
That's awesome.
He knew he knew me. That's all that matters.
Yeah,
He knew me. So I had a bit of credibility already, having like No ID knows who I am and has seen me before. And also really great moment on the session one time. We're doing some stuff, and he's all no man, just let him do it. He knows what I do, And so instantly everybody's like, oh okay man, this guy. No ID trusts him, so he must be like somebody,
Yeah.
And so that one day with Killer Mike turned into 6 months of us working together to do this album.
That's awesome.
All because, as a tracking engineer, I can touch anything, and I believe it. So the philosophy on that is a good tracking engineer. If you have a good tracking engineer, almost anybody can mix that in and do a good job because they're not getting work. They're getting, they're getting finished. They're getting things that have been edited, that have been cleaned up, that are put in the pocket. You're not moving anything. You're not tuning anything. You're sitting down and you can just be creative and work. Right. Yep. But a bad tracking engineer, you have to have a good mixer or else it's not going to sound good. It's like, so for me, I take my tracking to the point where it's like when people say stuff on sessions where they're like, man, yeah, it sounds so good and it hasn't even been mixed yet. Like it's been mixed the whole time. I've been mixing this whole time. I don't know what you're talking. Like I could very easily, and I say this all the time because I love Manny Marroquin so much. Like he was an early part of my upcoming too, because Alex the Kid was over at Larrabee and Manny is at Larrabee. Manny and Alex are really good friends. So I knew that anything I did for Alex was going to go into Manny's hands. And that was when I started being like, man, I'm not going to half-ass anything. Everything that comes out of me is going to go to Manny. And if I'm embarrassed, if I send something to Manny that doesn't sound good, I'm going to be so incredibly embarrassed for like, cause he's right here. He sees me every day. We get coffee together in the kitchen. It's Manny and Jason Joshua are the two like mixers that I just had to see every day of my life. And it's like, well, you better be good, bro, or you're going to be embarrassed as hell when one of these guys sees you in the hallway and thinks less of you,
Yeah.
And then, God, Manny's mixed a dozen records that I've done probably at least, and has always been, every time I come in, he's always like really, a few times, Manny personally recommended me for some sessions. And said like,
That's
oh
awesome.
yeah, Will's one of the good tracking engineers that I know. And that was like when Manny called me a good engineer one day, like that was like the moment where I was like, oh shit, man. Like I think I made
it's working.
it.
It's working. Yeah. It's funny. You talk about like, saying that you've been mixing the whole time. Right. And I think about, I don't know if you had this experience at East West. I came from Berkeley. I got my job at Capitol. And the first time somebody was like, hey, go in Studio A and take a coffee order. I just remember like opening the door mid-session, right? Stuff's coming out of the speakers. And the first thing I thought was, holy shit, this isn't mixed? This is crazy. It's like when you're in those studios, the bar of just like what is being recorded is like so high. 100%. So high.
100%. I heard one of my early sessions as an assistant was with this guy, Sebastian Chris, who does a ton of like, Latin Grammy type music.
Yep.
He's an NS10 user, right? And until that moment, I thought NS10s sounded shitty. You know, I was like, why does everybody use NS10s? I don't understand them. They don't sound good.
Yeah.
And I walked into that session. I worked with Sebastian Chris. It was God, I wish I could remember what that girl's name is. She was an amazing Spanish singer. She was like really, really talented, so good. And I walked into that session. We did that we did drums, full band tracking.
Yeah.
And we got done with that session. We were listening to mixes on the last day, and I remembered thinking, I have never heard NS10 sound this good before. Like, this sounds like the best thing I've ever heard. And that was my learning point. It was like, oh my God, NS10s don't sound bad. People are bad at working on NS10s. Like, people don't know how to mix on NS10s, and they don't know how to make things sound good. I swear to God, his stuff coming out of NS10s sounded better than most people on like the ATCs. You know, it was like listening to that, I was like, oh my God, he is such a good engineer. And those were the people that were teaching me how to be a tracking engineer, were like people like Sebastian Chris and Robert Carranza, who I absolutely adore and think is one of the best. Nico Bolas, who I'm sure you know very well.
I saw Nico a couple weeks ago. Yeah, love Nico.
I haven't seen Nico in literally like 8 years, but he still texts me like once a month to remind me to do push-ups, you know?
I'm trying to get Nico on the show. Nico, if you're listening to this, come on, man, get on here.
Yeah, man, he's a tough guy to track down. He's got he's such a busy person. Again, it's so hard to be friends with engineers because, like, how often do you really get a minute to even talk to these people? But, again, I came up under these people and they handed me the reins so many times on these sessions. Daryl Thorpe, he handed me he put me on a Cheap Trick session,
Nice.
He was like, man, yeah, just have Wil do it. He's good, like having people like that, people who are legends in this industry and who are, Daryl Thorpe's probably the only like rock engineer left in the entire fucking world that's fully employed doing rock music. Everybody else were like eating scraps of every other table, but Daryl Thorpe he's the first call on the Radiohead stuff, on the Foo Fighters stuff, on just everything rock all the time. So for him to be like, yeah, man, Wil's great. And we were doing the Cheap Trick stuff to tape too. And he was still like, yeah, well, I got to go, man. Just let Wil do it. He's great, And so those were like my early foundational days, was like people like that being like, yeah, man, Wil can do it. He's good. And me being like, oh, I hope so. I don't want to fuck up this Cheap Trick record.
Well, if he says so, I guess so. Yeah. That's awesome, man. Yeah, it feels good to get that validation, not that like, I don't know, something about engineers. We always like kind of, you want your friend to tell you that you made a record that sounds good. I don't know why we lean on it so much, but
it's so silly too.
But there's like an unspoken rule. Oh, sorry. There's an unspoken rule of if you can't do a gig, replace yourself with somebody better. So to have these people recognize that you can handle a gig and be like, hey, give it to Wil, that says a lot.
It's so funny you say that, because I have seen so many people who don't do that, who they think, well, if I pass this gig to somebody else that's good, I'll never get called again for that gig and I'll lose that revenue stream, or I'll lose. So they hand it off to somebody who's just adequate, who's not going to embarrass them. But me personally, if I can't do a gig, I want to find the best replacement I possibly can. I want to put on the best assistant that I know at some studio that's like ready to move up and do some shit. But like, I want people to come back to me and be like, hey man, that guy was amazing. Thank you. Like, we're going to have him do all of our stuff. Because honestly, to me, clients are like t-shirts. It's like you have one for a really long time, you might really like it, and then one day it's just gone and you don't know what happened to it, and like then you see yourself in a picture wearing that t-shirt and you're like, oh, right, that t-shirt. I wonder whatever happened to that t-shirt, man. It's just gone, it's just gone. I don't even see it anymore. And that's how I like to look at clients, like, I love them. I love that t-shirt. That's my favorite t-shirt in the world. Don't know what happened to it, but I'm sure it's somewhere cool. I'm sure it's in like, it's like some cool vintage shop or something, it's like rad.
That is an amazing analogy and so true, because you'll work with people for like years sometimes, and then just like one day,
and then it's just gone. You
never
just don't
again
see them anymore.
But it's fine. If you run into them in a coffee shop or something, it's all good.
Yeah, I'm never mad. I tell people all the time. I brought a guy up in this industry. His name is Unusual Demont. He's an amazing artist. When he first reached out to me, and when he was getting started or whatever, he was recording in a basement in Wisconsin with no headphones. He just had his speakers on just real low, and he would sing and I mixed all these songs. And I did it for like nothing because I was like, I really believe in this kid. I think he's really good. I helped him out. That's how I started doing live stuff again. As I started, organizing his live shows and like helping him do like a proper playback so he could have all his stuff and like be a real artist. And I tell him all the time, man, if you ever find somebody else that you like working with, like, I know I brought you into this industry, but don't ever hesitate to replace me. Like my feelings will never be hurt by somebody replacing me. My feelings will only be hurt if and I say this to my wives as well. My feelings will only be hurt if you stay and don't want to be there. It's like, because then we're not going to make good shit together. We're not going to make good music that way. If you're working with me out of necessity or out of fear of whatever, like me being mad, like we're not going to make good stuff that way. We're only going to make good stuff if you want to be here with me all the time. And so anybody that goes on and does other things, like Vic Mensa is a great example of that. At some point in time, he just decided to go back to Chicago, and I've been working with him for years. I'd done everything that he'd ever done for the most part. For that period of time, we did like five records or something together, 5 EPs or some shit. We did a lot of stuff together. I literally almost lived at his house. And then one day he just started. When he would come out to LA, he'd have a different engineer. It was like he was working with somebody else. And I never once, even he'll call me and ask for favors or help or like doing stuff, and I'll just do it. I don't care. He'll call and be like, "Hey man, can you just melodyne this one section, or can you do?" And I don't even like charge him for it. And just like, yeah, for sure, man, and like send it back to him. And it's like, no, it's not worth my time to like charge him $100 or whatever. So I just like, yeah, man, I just do it, and I send it back to him, and I've never once felt sad that we don't work together like that anymore. And I know this industry is a long business. You can start with somebody, not work with them for 20 years, and then 20 years later just start working with them again out of the blue. So I've never had a bad situation with that. I've never been sad at anybody going somewhere else and doing other things. I love to hear Vic's stuff and still hear that it sounds good, and be like, oh yeah, it still has a good quality to it. It didn't drop off just because I'm not there. And that's the other thing too that we think all the time, right? Is like, well, if I don't do this, then like somebody shitty is gonna do it, and then it's gonna like tarnish my legacy or whatever of having done good things with this person. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all. And at the end of the day, also, nobody really even cares. It's like nobody else is listening to these records being like, I noticed a very distinct quality drop off in the last 6 months. Have you switched engineers or no, nobody does that. People are like, yeah, new one's a banger, bro.
Yeah, that's it. It's funny the things that like we get lost in, like the tiny little details that ultimately don't matter, because the only thing that matters is a great artist making a great song, and we're just there to help that happen. As
I truly
making
believe
it sound
that.
good is like our hobby.
It is.
Yeah.
And the things, I think about this all the time. One of the things that like, I don't do on TikTok, I don't really give tips. I'm not a tip guy. I'm not a like, hey, if you want to like make this sound good, do this thing. Because I think, man, everybody knows all that shit. It exists already. All that stuff, all the information's out there in the world. Like what I actually think people really need, advice and help on is like the philosophical side of this job. To know that like, hey man, yes, you are going to tweak on that shit for like 6 hours. You're going to spend way too much time doing this one thing. Like I had a mix just the other day that I did for an artist that as soon as I started compressing the vocals, they were distorting. They sounded fine uncompressed, but as soon as I compressed them even the tiniest bit, they sounded distorted. And it was driving me insane. I was like, and I'm talking anywhere in the process, even on the master, I couldn't compress the master without the vocals distorting. And I'd have like a clean mix, and then I'd try and start putting a little master compression, and it would start sounding distorted. I spent hours tweaking over this, like really getting into like what is causing this. I'm trying to like, I'm doing different like plugins to like, you see if like maybe it's just like the the bit depth of this plugin isn't like processing properly. It's like it's weird. Maybe it's like maybe it's got some. Maybe I should oversample. If I use the oversampling on this plugin, I can. I did all this stuff, and finally, I just got so frustrated. I was like, "Fuck it, I'm just gonna send it to him and just see what he says." And he comes back. He's like, "Man, it sounds great, man." And I was like, "Well, I'm just like trying to deal with this distortion thing." He's like, "I have no idea what you're talking about. I'm not hearing any distortion." And I'm like, "No, there is distortion there. I'm hearing it." And like then I started getting back into it, like thinking about it. I was like, I hear it and it is distortion, but no one else
Doesn't
is
matter.
paying attention like that. No one
Yeah.
else is like, because it's only happening like at certain frequencies in certain parts of the song. And it's just a tiny little thing that's happening. And it's just for a split second. And it's not even really registering to anybody else. And I'm just sitting here tweeting. Anyway, the point is that I like to remind people that we all do this shit. That even the most pro best guys in the world have spent, have adjusted a plugin for like 10 minutes and then realized it wasn't even in the chain. It wasn't engaged. Oh man, at East West I used to see it all the time. I'd see people go into outboard gear and adjusting something, thinking that it was on a snare or it was on or it was on the, it's like, and I was like, you're not changing anything, bro. You're fucking with the tom right now. Like you're not even on the right EQ, bro. So we've all done it. Everybody's done it. Everybody's made mistakes. Everybody's spent too long. Everybody's gotten in their own head about stuff. Everybody's stressed about how good a mix sounds in comparison to the rough and been like, oh, but like this element of the rough was really cool. And how do I get that? And then nobody's cared about that thing that you spent hours dealing with or messing with, And so I dig into the philosophical stuff because I think we're creatures of just such insecurity. It's so hard, but we are just the most insecure little mice over here, like toiling away, making our little balls of hair nest, and then we're not even realizing like no one is ever going to even notice the fine details that we put in or care at 90% of it. And also, no one has ever hit me up and been like, "Hey man, that one mix you did was real shit though." So because we all have them too. We've all done some stuff at the end of the day that we weren't proud of, but we're just like, well, this is the job and I'm doing the best I can. And you can't live on that. You can't live on the one mix that you did that you don't like, or the song that you did that wasn't very good, or the stuff you get caught up in.
You cannot let that stuff eat away at you because it's a mental game. All right, dude, this has been
definitely
a lot of fun. I got to hit you with my normal closing questions. I don't know if you've heard the show. Maybe you know what these are. Maybe you don't.
No.
Okay, well, the first one's easy.
Coming in cold, baby.
Yeah, there you go. First one's easy. It's just listening recommendation. Are there any albums or artists that like really had a big impact on you, or stuff that you think people should be listening to that they're not? Just a shout out to some music.
I mean, yeah. So yeah, for sure. All right. So definitely you should check out the Shags if you've never heard the Shags. This is one of the best bands that has ever existed. It's like right up there with like Captain Beefheart in my heart, with like the Trout Mask replica, where it's like, oh man, 90% of the time I'm not sure if this is complete insanity or the most like brilliant thing I've ever heard in my entire life. This story is insane. It's these three girls whose dad had like a prophecy that they were going to become major music stars, and so he just locked them in their basement and made them make music with no instruction or skill or whatever. And they just wrote a bunch of weird songs. They got like these songs about like their dog and like how much they love him, and like
my god.
And it's mixed meter, but not in the way you think. It's like the guitarist is playing like 5/4 over like a 4/4 drum beat, or like it's like the weirdest things you've ever heard. And I like it was one of Kurt Cobain's favorite bands too, but they're just absolute insanity. And it sounds the worst, but you'll listen to it one time and you'll be like, this is insanity. I don't know what's going on here. And then the second time you listen to it, you'll be like, actually, that's really interesting. Like, how are they doing this? Like, I can't. And then at some point in time, you'll just get lost in this madness. And like I'm obsessed. Like, I listened to the Shags' first record probably every week for the last like year of my life. Like I can't get over it. It's so amazingly bad, but so good. It's very much like if anybody out there has listened to Trout Mouse Replica, the Captain Beefheart album, it's very much like that, but poorer quality. It's like the audio is really bad too. So it's like
Oh God.
on top of it being insane, it's like also really like just horrible sounding. But I don't know, man. It's like something about it. It's like being obsessed with what was the rotten.com? It's like rotten.com where like you're like, why am I looking at these pictures of dead people? Like I don't know why I want to do this, but I do, and I hate it and it gives me nightmares, but then the next day I wake up and I'm like, the first thing I do is click on Rotten. So that's one that nobody is probably going to know, but you should definitely check out. I definitely think if you're looking for like the new Steely Dan Asia record, like lots of people always bring that up, and I think it's a really great record. Obviously, like it was done really well. It's like the peak of session players, peak of performance engineering, production, all the things. But I think that you should stop referencing that album and start referencing How Big, How Blue, How Beautiful from Florence and the Machine. I think that album is sonically one of the best things I've ever heard in my entire life. It just, every single part of it is so well done and so beautiful, and I just love the shit out of it. Obviously, my heart is not in that type of music. My heart is in like a rock world. I'm always going to be a Nirvana, Soundgarden, Pink Floyd kind of person. But my God, that album, every single time, Ship to Wreck is just an unbelievable recording and mix and everything, and construction, composition, everything about that's amazing. I always talk about it. I'm doing song reviews now on my TikTok. I've been doing 90s recently. I haven't gotten into the 2000s. But getting into the 90s has been such a big, like, eye-opening thing to listen to these things and be like, wow, actually, I never cared how bad Oasis sounds. Like, I've never cared once. But when I actually sat down and dissected those songs, they are garbage. They are absolute hot garbage tracking. Everything is just dimed on compression the whole time. You can't make out any, like, it has no transients whatsoever on the entire album. Like, the drums are just buried underneath all this bullshit. They're the worst songs that have ever been recorded in like a modern era. And yet we never cared about that. So it's like also at the same time of like, hey, that's why the Shags exist in my life, is to be like, let's get the worst thing and see if I can still enjoy it just for being music, And I do. I love it. It's so good.
That is amazing. Well, I'll put links to both those in the show notes, and I'll definitely be listening to the Shags later.
Oh my God, it's gonna change your life. You're gonna text me later and be like, bro, you're gonna be like, this is gonna be the process. Yeah. You're gonna be like, this is the worst thing I've ever heard. And then like by the second song, you're gonna start to be like, oh man, it's like so interesting. Like how, and then look up their story. Their story is just mind blowing. It's like literally like their dad just thought they were gonna be superstars, so he locked them in a basement and made them make music.
That's crazy. I love it. Okay. So now the serious questions.
All right.
So this is a new one that not too many people have had. It's have you ever made a mistake in your career that turned into a huge catalyst for growth? And are you willing to share it if you have?
Oh God. Yeah, I mean, every mistake I make is a huge catalyst for growth. I will say this as somebody who has been in a very similar situation. I think that leaving East West whenever I did, because my first job was for Alex the Kid. So my first real engineering gig, I left East West to work for Alex the Kid. And he is, his style of production is fine. Like, I'm not going to drag him. Like, we had a fine relationship that he's like, whatever. He does some weird stuff that I'm not a big fan of now, looking back, in terms of business wise or whatever. But the worst part about it is that I got stuck in a room just plowing away writing sessions for like a year of my life. And then, and he sucked up all my time. It was 6 days a week, 10, 12 hours a day, every single day, working nonstop, like doing all this stuff. And I also didn't get credited on a lot of the stuff that I worked on. The only time I did get credited was when people went out of their way to specifically make sure I got credited, I didn't get credited on X Ambassadors. I didn't get credited on any of the Imagine Dragons stuff that I did. Skylar Grey, because her ex, Todd, loved me, and was like, oh, hey, look, hey, Kenny. Her ex loved me, so he always made sure I got credited on everything that I did. He was always like, oh yeah, Will's great guy. And even whenever they came out to Look at this. My cat has his own little like stair
Oh, look
perch thing.
at him go.
Yeah, he's rad. Anyway, so that was the only thing I ever got credited on for him, and it and then people who called me for gigs for that time I was with him, I had to tell him no. I had to turn down work all the time, and then whenever he left Larrabee and came to Capitol, Capitol's deal was you have to have a Capitol engineer,
I don't know
and
anything
so
about this.
yeah, and so I basically just got dumped like with no warning, like a day's warning basically. I thought, "Oh, hey, we're going to go over to Capitol and I'll start doing this over at Capitol or whatever." And he just dropped me and I was out on my own, and that started a period of my life that was the hardest time of my career. That was the worst, hardest time of my career was the 8 months after I left Alex a Kid before I started regularly working with Vic Mensa. Was the worst time of my life. I struggled so hard. All my regular gigs were gone because people knew I was busy all the time, so they just got somebody else,
Yeah.
And I had worked
Yeah.
for him just long enough that everybody had pretty much moved on, and I had to start over in the industry from zero, from nothing. Like I had a few connections, and I just, I got on the phone. Robert Carranza talked me off a ledge like 6 times. I'd be like, man, what am I going to do? And Robert would be like, you're a good engineer, man. Just believe in the system. It will work out for you. Like, I know you're good. I know you can do it. And I just struggled so hard for so long. And then one day I just got a phone call, and I was like, and I've been busy since, but overcommitting to somebody, leaving East West to go into that situation, although it was like, oh, hey, I'm an engineer, and like I didn't make any contacts that were worth anything. I didn't meet any people that were going to pay me to do work later. I didn't get into any situations that were good for me. The only really good thing that came from it at the time was my association with Manny, and I got to know Manny a little bit, and through that, and also the manager of Larrabee at the time. So this is how it actually turned into a good thing. The manager of Larrabee at the time was a woman named Amy. And Amy, because Larrabee is a mixing studio mostly, anytime they had tracking sessions, they didn't have an assistant that could handle it. It was like they always had these guys that didn't know enough to like do a real session. So Amy would call me after I left working for Alex every now and then. She'd call me and say, "Hey, we booked a session in Studio 5 or 7 or whatever the big room is that was Bill Schnee's old place." They changed the number like 6 times. I don't know what it is anymore. But she'd be like, "Hey, we booked a session over in there, but it's a string recording session, and I don't really know what's anybody that can do that. So would you come and assist on this session?" She's like, "I'll give you a good rate, And I think she paid me like $25 an hour to assist, which is a good enough number to be like, okay, like I'm bigger than assisting right now, but I'll take this because I really need money and I don't give a shit." So I popped over there, and I started doing sessions. I met Justin Timberlake. Well, I worked again with Justin Timberlake because I'd worked on the strings of 2020 Experience before. So I re-met Justin Timberlake, who then hired me to do another gig for him for tracking a band. I met Chris Fogel, who is a really great engineer, and he was opening up a studio, and he was working with Ludwig Göransson and Teddy Shapiro. So and he was like, "Hey man, I just got this studio going, and I need somebody like you who's like a assistant, but like that can also do sessions for me sometimes, or can run stuff when I'm not around and stuff like that." So I got pulled into his world and started doing the Ludwig Göransson stuff. I worked on Disney movies. That's how I got into The Greatest Showman, was again Chris being like, "Hey, I need an extra set of hands on this. It's a little bit bigger than I can handle, and I don't have a good assistant to do this, And so I got into that world, and I really did get a lot of like little connections along the way. It was all my hard work, and it was all me that got there. But
Yeah.
but Alex bringing me over to Larrabee and having me work for him, like it was extremely detrimental to my career and hurt really bad. But in the long run, also gave me just those few little connections, those 1 or 2 little people that just changed the course of my career. I mean, to this day,
Yeah.
I talk to Chris all the time, and just, I mean, he's such a cool guy. Like, again, very few of these people, outside of like being on the phone to talk to me, like Robert Carranza's given me one gig in my entire career. No, two gigs actually, 2 gigs in my entire career. One of them was mixing the Home Depot song. You know the Home Depot song? I mixed the Home Depot song.
That's amazing. That's
and
awesome.
The other was working with Tyler Bates. I did a couple sessions when Robert was out of town working with Tyler Bates, and
Okay.
those were just one-off sessions. So it's like I didn't have a long. I mean, Tyler likes me. We're good or whatever. It's not an issue. But like, it's not a recurring job because Robert does that job. It's like
Yeah.
he just had me fill in one time. Chris the same way. Chris employed me for a while, but since I left, he's handed me like 1 or 2 gigs, and been like, "Hey, here's the thing." But most guys, like they're more for me. Like their mentorship is like, I just need somebody to keep me from jumping off this ledge, just today, because I'm done with this industry. And they're really
Yeah.
good at that because they've been through some tough ones too. Really great guys, love them.
Yeah. Well, I have a million things to say to all that, but something that I've noticed in our whole conversation is that you work for what you want, and even though you had that setback because Alex went to Capitol and maybe started working with me, uh,
Yes, that's
you
precisely what happened.
yeah, I know
That
exactly.
is scientifically what happened.
Yeah, it's
You stole my job.
I only had it for a year too. It's fine. Um, it's yeah, you keep your eye on the prize and you put the work in, and that's it. There's just like there's a thread of strong work ethic that I think has put you where you are, despite bumps in the road. Because the thing about this industry is there's nothing but bumps in the road. And I feel the parallel of working with somebody. I mean, I worked at Capitol twice. I don't know, you don't know my story, I don't think too much, but I never really made it to assistant there because nobody leaves because it's a good gig.
Right.
So I went to go work for this Disney guy, and we were just working in his basement. He built an amazing studio. Just me and him every day doing like Hannah Montana, Jonas Brothers, doing all this Disney stuff. And one day I was just like, what? Like, I don't do anything else. Like, I know like one guy. I'm not even involved in the writing sessions. I sit
Right.
in this room and I mix and I edit. And that's how I kind of navigated my way back to Capitol. And then when I left Capitol a second time to go work for Alex, that gig just didn't pan out for me because I was a different place in my life. He,
Right.
like he wants 12, 14 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I met my
It's
wife and I
very
was like,
difficult.
I can't give up my relationship for these writing sessions. You know what I mean? And you're just like,
Meanwhile, I'm over here just throwing relationships away.
yeah, but
no, but very
yeah.
valid, very
Yeah.
valid. That's I mean, very valid. Like
there's
like,
so much
you
to
have to make some.
learn. What I was just
Yeah.
gonna say, there's so much to learn when you're working closely with somebody, especially somebody that's as talented, as successful as Alex or this other guy that I worked for, or some of the people that you've worked with. But you really have to recognize when it's a potential detriment, and I think a lot of people maybe don't. They miss
Yeah.
they miss that they miss that off ramp, and before it's too late, or after
Right.
it's too late.
And this is like the thing I was talking about before with like the 12-year assistant situation too, is like you get into this pattern, you get it, it's comfortable,
Yeah.
It is comfortable to know like, hey, this is where, because the scariest thing in the world is to be dropped. And I was dropped into the freelance world. Like I was just unceremoniously like launched into, you're a freelance engineer now. And I was like, uh-oh. But like you said, like I hustled, like that first week that I was without a job from Alex, I was on the phone with everybody that I knew, just being like, hey, yeah, dude, if you need anything, if you know anybody that needs anything, I'll do anything. And I did anything at that time. There's a really funny story. So I started working at that time. During that period of time, I started working with Balt Getty. I don't know if you know who he is, but Balt Getty
Don't.
is he's an actor and a musician, and he's of the Getty family Gettys. He's
Okay.
like
Okay.
he's the oldest. He's the son of John Paul Getty III, the guy who got kidnapped in Italy and held for ransom or whatever. There's a
Right,
whole story about this. It's wild. If anybody wants to look this up, it's interesting as shit. But anyway, so he's just like this, rich dude, has a house in Hollywood, and he bought Rick Rubin's old place. And when I showed up, it had like an 8048 or an 8068, I can't remember, 8068 in the basement or whatever. But I showed up and he was like, somebody called me and was like, hey man, here's this gig. They didn't tell me anything about it. They're like, here's this gig. It's at this place. it's like $35 an hour engineering. Like, what do do you want it? And I was like, fuck yes, I'll take anything right now. Like, I will take any gig. I do not care. And I went out and I engineered for this dude for like $35 an hour. And the first day I got there, I literally, I was like, I showed up, no one's there. They're like, yeah, just make yourself at home in the studio or whatever. I go into the studio, there's no power in the studio. And then I call some people and they're like, oh yeah, you got to go downstairs into the basement and turn on all the breakers. And so I'm like, literally I had my laptop in the room and my phone, and I FaceTimed myself and went down to the basement. Well, and I'm like, literally, there's like literal skeletons down there. There's literal skeletons in this basement and shit. I'm like walking around trying to find it's old, like dusty ass, like Hollywood style basement. It's like what you would expect to be in like some old ass like mansion in Hollywood. It's just like books and like weird like Hollywood shit, and a literal skeleton. And down there, and I'm like walking around, finally find the breakers, and I'm over there flipping breakers on and off throughout like the whole thing because nothing's labeled, and they're like the old school style, like big like Jurassic Park style shit, I'm like down there like turning on breakers, and then finally the lights come on my phone. I see the FaceTime upstairs on my laptop, the lights come on in the studio, and I'm like, oh shit, all right. I'm like literally doing like electrician work to figure stuff out to get stuff going. But I was like, I don't care, man. Whatever I have to do to survive right now, I'm gonna do it, because I cannot, at this point in my life, I cannot go back to Phoenix, Arizona, and try. And on another little side story of that, I almost did go back to Phoenix. When I lost that job, my ex, she told me like, just come home for like a little bit. We'll like figure some stuff out, So I went back for like a weekend to see my daughter and my ex and everything. And while I was there, there's a studio in Arizona called the Salt Mine. And I went and I heard that they said that they were looking for an engineer there. And I went over and I talked to the guy and told him what I've been up to and everything. And he said, I'm looking for somebody a little bit more, real world experience. And I was like, fuck are you talking about? Like, I was working at East West. Like, he really insulted me like really bad because like, I didn't have a lot of credits, but I certainly had been doing a good amount of stuff at that point. I'd worked on Imagine Dragons records and shit, and he turned me down. And honestly, that was probably the best thing that's ever happened to me in my life, because if I'd have been stuck working in that studio for that dude, like nobody makes good records in Phoenix, it's like if I'd gotten stuck in that situation, that would have been the end of Wil Ansbach. I'd have never become Greazy. I'd have never become the person I am now. I'd have just stayed in Arizona and been miserable for the rest of my life. And my ex, to her credit, also was like, look, you're not going to be happy here. Like, you've already tasted the top. You can't come back here and just, work for shitty punk bands in Arizona. Like, you gotta stay at the top. And so I stayed and I pushed and I made it, and I think I made it anyways.
You're good, man. You're crushing it. So last two questions. This one, I really think the answer to this one is like mixed in what we were just talking about. But was there a time in your career that you chose to redefine what success meant to you?
Man, only recently. It's very funny, actually. TikTok made me realize I was successful. I talk about this. So I have a podcast myself that we just started, me and Shane Lance from TikTok, who is a really great producer engineer guy. He came up in a big studio in Seattle and then came down here, and we started a podcast together. It's not out yet, but it's called That Sounds About Right. We wanted to get crafty with the name. But we talk about this all the time because both of us have really good TikTok followings, and both of us have been doing this forever. And it wasn't until TikTok that I suddenly was like, actually, like, I am at the top of this industry. And then I suddenly realized, like, yourself, myself, the handful of us that are out here that aren't famous necessarily, but work on big projects all the time and like can do that studio vibe, that can do anything inside, know all that process. We're really rare. Like, if you can do that in this world, you're in probably the 1% of engineers in the world. It's like there's not, in comparison to how many people own Pro Tools and own Logic and own Ableton, I'm in the top 1% of engineers, definitely.
For sure.
And
it
was not until I figured out TikTok that I realized, I got 60,000 people that follow me that are like, you're the best engineer in the world. And I'm like, oh shit,
You're like,
like
what?
maybe I, yeah, maybe I actually, so TikTok actually helped me redefine success for myself. And my ex, who knows me probably better than anybody in the world, my daughter's mother, who's been with me for, since I was nobody, since I was somebody who was just getting out of the military and like trying to find my place in the world and all that. She tells me she used to say all the time, she doesn't have this issue, but she used to say all the time, like, you hold such high standards for what success means that I don't think you'll ever get there. And I believed her for a really long time. I was like I moved the goalposts a million times on success. I moved the, like, well, if I get here, she said, you used to always say just getting a job at East West was success. And now you're out here like, being like, well, I need a Grammy that's actually mine, like, because
Right.
I worked
With your
on John
name on
Batiste's thing. Yeah. I need my Grammy that not only that has my name on it, but that the person whose album it is that I did that is like, you did this for us. You are entirely responsible for this. And had you not been here, like, I need that type of recognition, or at least felt like it before I would feel like, oh, I'm there. But man, I worked on Channel Orange 5 months into my career. That was the first thing I did in the industry, like the first thing that I was like, oh, I actually like worked on this record, like I did things on this. And so, but I also felt, because that's Jeff Ellis's record. That Jeff Ellis did that record. Like I say like, oh, I worked on Channel One, but Jeff Ellis did that record. I like printed some stuff to tape one time and like, and like did, so it's like, I removed myself from feeling the credit or, the responsibility for any of that. When it was successful, it was like, oh yeah, I was on that, but you're not going to see me being like, I'm Frank Ocean's engineer, because Caleb had that job and Jeff had that job. I filled in places, I did little pieces, and stuff like that. But I didn't feel like on Channel Orange or Blonde, I didn't feel like I had a significant enough portion of that to take any credit for it, And so it constantly pushed me into this situation to feel like even when I did do stuff that was successful later, I still felt like, oh, I wasn't really that important to it. It was this person's, thing, or this person's thing, and I've always been handing out the credit for all this shit. But then TikTok came around and I didn't even have to tell people just look up my credits and be like, bro, you were an assistant on Channel Orange? And I'm over here being like, yeah, but I was just the assistant, like I wasn't special or anything. But now I'm like, actually, you know what I did? I worked on that record. I did stuff on it. I wasn't the engineer, but I did stuff on it. I can feel proud of that, and I feel better accepting, accolades for the things that I've been a part of, even if I've been a small part,
Yeah. Well, I think, when you've been doing this for as long as you and I have, and you've been in the rooms that we've been in, it seems normal. You know what I mean? You're just doing the gig. But then when you put it in perspective and think about how many people would kill for that, and then you think
100%.
about like you feel guilty for bitching like about a session when you think about it that way. You're like, I can't believe I complained about doing that gig when there's like 2,000 kids that would just die to beat the door down and like get in there.
You literally grew up in the shadow of Al Schmidt. It's like
That's
one
true.
of who is considered to be the best engineer of all time, who worked until he died. It's like
he did. And
and anytime I was over at Capitol and Nico would be like, let's go see Al. And I always like, for me, guys like you and Diego and Ira and shit like that, I was always jealous because I was like, those guys get to be around Al Schmidt. Meanwhile, I'm over at East West doing all the same type of shit, being like jealous because y'all got to see Al Schmidt every day.
The grass is always greener.
Like 5 times. Yeah, definitely.
Well, it's you were talking about vocal engineering. Like I wanted to bring this up. Vocal engineering so long ago, and how like it's become like the first thing you give somebody. It's like, oh, they're just going to cut the vocals. But man, I used to watch Al. He would run split console for anybody that wants to. That's record on one side and playback on the other side. But he'd sit in the middle, and the vocal to tape was on channel 24, which is right in his left hand. Vocal playback, channel 25, which is on the other side of the master section. and he would play that vocal the same way that the vocalist played it. He'd ride it to tape when it needed more
Right.
level, he'd back it off, and then at the same time, manage the playback in the room. So it's like, I wanna record it better, but I need to compensate for playback for everybody in this room. And
Right.
you're just that's that's what I watched people record. That's how I learned to record vocals, is watching people like that. And now I think about somebody in their bedroom plugging into a duet, and vocals seem unimportant. I'm like, vocals are the most
Right.
important part, you know?
Yeah.
Not to knock the way that
Yeah.
people record now, but it's just a different era. And I just feel so lucky to get to witness that even for a second, just to
Yeah.
know
Yeah.
that's the
Yeah.
way it was done.
Definitely.
But
Yeah. Coming up around some of those people, it's like you definitely got so much more importance to like the process and so much reverence. For me, anybody who ever works with me will see that I am. I believe that the recording process has been, it's like it's diluted because people look at it now and it's just like, oh, it's just a vocal and blah 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 and all that shit like we were talking about. But to me, uh, it's so much deeper than all of that stuff. I'm into the psychology of this process. Like I just recorded this band from Bakersfield called The Rivals, which, they when they reached out to me, they found me on TikTok and they reached out to me and they were like, hey, they keep saying that their through line is that we're a moderately successful regional cover band, and they're like, but we had some new original songs. They're all in like their 40s, like late 30s, early 40s, and they're like, we have some songs that we just think would be cool to record properly, and like get a real, because the guy who reached out to me, he follows me because he does a little bit of engineering or whatever, but he's like, I'm nowhere on your level, blah blah blah, that stuff. And they never really recorded anything for real before, and all that stuff. So when they came down to work with me, I was like, yeah, let's just do a day at East West. And I like to do a day at East West because you're going to get an experience. Some people spend their money on, Disneyland tickets, and that's how they spend a day. I convince these people to spend the money on a day at East West. And
mhm.
I think that when you do stuff like that, when you bring people into your home like that and you give them an opportunity to record, you are doing something like psychologically, you are giving them this experience, and this experience in these rooms and in these ways. And like when you like again when I'm doing this kind of stuff, I'm in there, I'm giving the history lessons, like the history lesson on East West that started. I got 3.5 years of given tours at East West that I know everything that's been done. I know that I Will Always Love You was cut in the vocal booth in Studio 2, like I know, and I can hear it. I can
Yeah.
literally hear the sound of Studio 2 on records and be like, oh, that was East West for sure, and so that place, I took them into the echo chamber. We sang in the echo chamber, like in the dark because there's no lights in there and shit. And like I recorded them from the echo chamber. I took a headphones, unit up there and like ran the Cat 5 cable all the way up the stairs and shit. I I think that I think that you can hear that in their record. They're a regionally successful cover band or whatever, but they got something really magical in that room that day, and we did something because I gave them the full experience. And I think that when you do that for bands, when you do that for artists, even if it's just a vocal, even if you're just in there, like, I like to pump people up. I like to make them feel like they're special. I like to make them feel like they're doing something important so that it comes out. Uh, Nico used to always say to me that you can hear a smile in a song. And I think that's so true, is that like you can hear when somebody's having a good time while they're doing this. And it's
Yeah.
like, and you feel it.
Yeah.
And I think that type of philosophy of stuff, if people approach even just your vocals in your home like that, I wouldn't, if I go to somebody's house to record a vocal, I'm still like, hey man, let's get the lighting right or something in here. It's like, if we're gonna be doing this, like let's get the lighting right. And most artists that work with me know that, like when I was working with Zach De La Rocha, part of the gig is sitting out back, chain smoking cigarettes, and talking about, politics, talking about how stupid Ron DeSantis is, or like, some shit like that. Like that's part of the gig. And if that's where you're going to go, bro, I will sit here with you for 12 hours straight, chain smoke cigarettes and talk politics with you. Cause then we're going to go into the studio. And even if it's just for one little verse that we're working on, you're going to hear that. You're going to hear that we've been
Yeah.
chain smoking and talking politics on the porch, and it's going to feel like that, you know? And I think that that's part of this lost thing. Like when you talk about the old school guys and all that shit, like those guys, you know, all my heroes were like that. If you're going to get drunk on this session, I'm getting drunk with you. If you're going to get high on the session, I'm getting high with you. Like,
Yeah.
let's shoot some smack. Let's do it, bro. Whatever it takes. I want to be in the same headspace as you because I want to understand you as an artist. I don't just want to hear your song. I want to understand you as an artist, you know?
Yeah. That's awesome. That's awesome. Okay. So last question, is, what right now is your current biggest goal? And what's the next smallest step you're going to take to go towards it?
All right. So, so I was part of a horrible thing, right? I fought a war, right? I invaded another country, you know, to benefit Dick Cheney's wallet mostly, you know, like we didn't go into Iraq altruistically just trying to liberate these people, no matter what Republican bullshit artist is going to spin it that way. Like we went into that country for money, and war is always about money. And part of the process of that war was that we took culture from these people. When we pulled out of Iraq, when the Marines pulled out of Iraq, you know, a few years back, ISIS went in and they took over, and you know, it's the same as with the Taliban in Afghanistan. When we leave, the bad guys come back in, you know, and they're worse than the people that were there before. You know, it's like, so in cities like Mosul, it was illegal by punishment of death to make music. You know, it was like we didn't just take culture from them by like destroying all their artifacts and stealing all their shit and shipping it to the British, you know, Royal Museum. We also literally stopped people in that country from being able to make music for a long period of time. And they fought back and they retook their home, and they're rebuilding out of the ashes of what we fucking left in. And I will carry guilt for that for a long time. So one of the things that I'm working on is I am trying to get audio companies that I like to give me equipment, to give me things that I need, you know, and I need enough things to go back to Iraq, and I want to help give music back to those people. So what I am trying to do is build up enough money and support from companies so that I can go back over there. I'd like to find some artists from Iraq, you know, who are there now trying to do music, trying to be musicians. I'd like to find some good ones and help them make music. And not only that, bring equipment and bring, you know, my knowledge and teach people how to do what I do, even at a basic level. Even if I can just get some Focusrites and some GarageBand, like I don't care what it takes, but I'm going to go back to that country, and I'm going to give them my experience and my knowledge, and help replace some of the culture that I helped destroy, because that will weigh on my heart for a long time. That'll be a part of me that is always feeling like I was, you know, I mean, I was a kid. I was 18. You know, I had nothing better. My family was poor. I was lucky to have peanut butter for dinner a lot of times when I was growing up. So you know, that's who the military preys on. That's who is perfect for that situation. And I want to, you know, I know it wasn't my fault, but I was complicit. I was part of it. And taking personal responsibility for things, whether you feel like it's entirely your fault or not, taking personal responsibility is something that I believe very heavily in. And that is something that I'm my future goal. I hope to do it before the end of the year. I hope, and I want to make a documentary out of it. You know, it's part political to say like, yeah, like I was from a Republican household, and I was all for going into Iraq when we went. You know, I was waving flags just like everybody else and go America and we're the best and all the same shit. But we owe that country something. We owe all the countries that our capitalist fucking endeavors have helped destroy. You know,
Yeah.
which is also why, you know, similarly for like Vic Mensa has been, and Chance the Rapper have been doing concerts in Ghana and trying to help build up Ghana. And that's another place that, like traditionally Africa in general as a whole continent has been traditionally exploited by American capitalism. Well, all capitalism all over the world. But, so I try and anytime he needs help on any of those things, I help out with that. Like, just gratuity free and everything. I'm just trying to give back to a bunch of people that have been, robbed by the pale faces of the world, historically. And so I'm always trying to help disadvantaged communities. I'm trying to give back to more people because, we got to start, somebody's got to start taking responsibility and being like, okay, like I've benefited from all these things. I still am benefiting from being in the military. I get disability. Like, obviously that's, my own life and been damaged by that. But I'm not just gonna take all the time and get all the advantages of everything and not give back to the world. So it's a really big deal for me to try and find, ways like that to give back. And with Iraq, I think I can change public perception on things. I think my documentary can give a lot of information to the world that we only see from one side. We only see the perspective of like, this is what like the war machine of America wants us to believe about war. But at the end of the day, it's like, nah, man, we destroyed a whole culture in that country, and that's my big goal right now. I've actually, the steps beyond all that. One of my old platoon commander is a congressman now. He's Seth Moulton from Boston. We still stay in touch. We just had dinner the other day, and he's also connected to a lot of people who can help this go on. And so I've been reaching out to him to get help finding more people to get on board with this idea. And it's at some point in time I'm going to need to get things like approval from the government to do certain things and all that, and connections inside the Iraqi government to be able to come into the country with all this stuff and do these things. And so that's what I'm doing. I'm building support. I'm doing podcasts and talking about it and putting it out there on the internet so people know that this is a thing that I'm working towards, so that so that I can help heal some of my soul and also benefit people and do some good shit in the world. So music's a real healer, isn't it?
It is.
Like we can do so much with music. When we look at the 60s in America and what political pressure was put on by musicians making songs against the government and standing up for things that they believe in and all that stuff, like music can be extremely powerful. So giving that or helping give that back to some people, or helping some people succeed with that, that's a really good way to undo some of the bad that I've been a part of. And so that's the goal. That's the big one. Small goals. I got my own TikTok career, so I'm trying to use that to, keep building up the career and everything. But, I work a lot more with starting out artists, because I think that's, nobody cares whenever you do a record with Cheap Trick. They've already done all like the important stuff. The big groundbreaking part of that is already, so no one's looking at a Cheap Trick record being like, oh, Wil Onsbach worked on this. This is really a great engine. But when you break an artist or you bring an artist into the industry, people will look at you and be like, oh, that's because you did that. And that's a big, that's a more gratifying situation than the opposite,
Yeah.
So trying to do more of that, trying to find more artists to bring into the world and all that. But yeah, I'm going to put my life in my hands a little bit and go back to a, previously war-torn country and do some good.
Dude, that is probably the best answer I've had. That's really impressive. And it's like, you think about, like, so many people go through their whole life and they may not change anyone else's life. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So the idea that you want to go over there and you want to bring music back and teach some people how to record, make a documentary, whether you change the world is irregardless to the fact that there's going to be 10, 20, 30 people whose lives are going to be changed permanently. And most
And the
people,
echo effect of that is
exactly.
so big.
Yes.
You know?
And like you said, somebody has to start, because it's easy to sit around and talk about like changing everything. Like, how do we change everything? But it's the domino effect of like, this person did good to these 5 people, those 5 people will do good to those 10 people. And like, that's really the only way to make change. This idea that we're getting into politics, this idea that you can whole scale change a country or a city or a state, it's not fucking realistic. You know, it has to be people taking action, which is a lot of what this show is about, is people taking action in their career. But yeah, man, that's a super noble one. I appreciate you sharing that. And if you need
Yeah,
support in any way,
absolutely.
let me know. The show can gladly support you in whatever way. So
Yeah, I mean, obviously, you know, this is the support, is getting the message out of this is what I'm trying to do and putting it out into the world. Because also, I believe very strongly in putting things out into the world because two things. One, you never know. Maybe some, you know, maybe some company right now, the president of some audio company is going to listen to this and be like, oh, dang, I want to be a part of that, and reach out to me. Or maybe it's just one person who has no connections to anything, but they spread the word to say, oh man, it's really cool with that. And then some, through that ripple effect, it gets to somewhere. It's like, but the other part of it too is like, I'm holding myself accountable because I'm saying that I'm going to do that
yes,
to
right.
the world. And so I do have to actually do it. You know, I can't
Yeah.
just talk about it forever. So putting it out into the world is me holding myself accountable to continue to push myself. And I mean, like I talk a lot about a lot of things, but overall, the real takeaway from the military for me is like, you can be a horrible person and just go the rest of your life not caring about the impact that you've had, or you can look and see like, hey man, everything, like you said, like helping 20, 30 people, helping one person, you know, the chain of that, you know, the way that one person, especially music is so glorious for this, man. I can help one person, and that one person could write a song that the entire world hears
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and changes mass things. You know, you could change the whole world with music over just this tiny little thing that I'm doing. Bro, I'm just pushing record. This shit's easy as hell to me. It's a joke like how easy recording is to me. I've never, not in probably almost 10 years, have I felt like, oh, this is like a tough thing to do. Like I'm really challenged right now, you know. And when an artist does even give me a tiny bit of challenge, I'm like, wow, this is kind of cool. I get excited by it, you know. Like like there was this time Keith, the assistant from East West, called me and he said, hey man, we got this session over here. They're tracking and mixing at the same time, right? So they're like tracking on some songs and like doing overdubs and all this stuff. And then also on the other half of the board, they're mixing and doing like, you know, out of the box mix stuff, like, you know, going into and the engineer that was on it walked out because he's just done. He doesn't want to do it anymore. And we asked the assistant if he thought he could take over, and he was like, no. And he's like, and also like they've been having a lot of technical problems in the studio, which is why the engineer walked out, because he was like frustrated over like, you know, some stuff not going the way he wanted to, and like just, and I was like, Keith, come on, stop, bro. You can only get me so hard right now, man. Like, I'll be there in 10 minutes, man. Just chill. I'll be there so soon. It's like that kind of stuff. I'm like, oh my God, that sounds awful. Cool, I'll be there so soon, man. I'm on my way.
That
Like,
sounds dope. Sign me up. I'll do it free. I'll pay you
yeah.
to do it.
Yeah. You could. I could. I would literally probably pay to do this job if you asked, if you put it in the right situation. I'd be like, ooh, that sounds fucking impossible. Fuck. I'll be there soon, man. I'm on my way. You know.
That's awesome.
So yeah, you know, I mean, my whole goal, another goal too. Also, this should be thrown out there too because this affects you even more. Another thing that I'm trying to do, I'm trying to raise popularity for myself to get to a certain point, to be a voice for people, for engineers. But I'm very dismayed at the fact that we have no protection as engineers. We have nothing. We have nothing. You know, we don't get any points on the records. You know, usually we don't get any part of the records. We don't even have health care. We don't. When we're young, we're exploited. We're taken care of. We're not taken care of. We're you know, paid $10 an hour to do some menial fucking bullshit job. Like we're treated very poorly throughout our life. and I want to build a union for engineers. I want to get to a point where my popularity is large enough that I can say like, look, and gather my fellow engineers who have mouthpieces, who have credibility to their name, and be like, hey, look, this is going to hurt us a little bit, but it's going to help the industry as a whole. And if we can help the industry as a whole, it will only be good for us. It will only be good long term to have credibility for the people that do this job, and to have protection to people, because I want to see I'd love to see healthcare. I'd love to see us getting I hate to see the labels getting such a big piece of an artist, and the people who make the music like us getting such a small piece of it. Like, we're the hardest working, and it doesn't happen without us. It's not you can't record some of these records without somebody like us to do this stuff, and although mixers tend to start getting more points these days, the tracking guys don't get anything. The tracking guys get a day rate at best, and forgotten immediately. So
50-50, you get a credit as well.
Yeah, probably not even. I'd say it's more like, man, 10% of the time I get credited on the things, if I'm lucky, But as I'm getting bigger, I start saying more of these things like, hey, make sure you credit your, I make sure on my sessions that my assistants get credited. I go out of my way, and it is as the engineer, on a session, if you're not making sure your people are getting credited properly and taken care of, like, you're part of the problem too. You need to talk to these artists and make sure they know that this is a big deal. You got to do this stuff, and you got to help people, and and overall, the bigger overreaching goal of everything is like, we got to take care of our own. We got to help our own. And we got to build a better industry for ourselves, because long term, we're not going away. This job's never going to go away. I don't care about AI. I don't care about any of that stuff. The job's never going to go away. It's just going to get more exploitive of the people who do it, And so if we don't start doing things now to start, building this community to be more helpful to each other, to have a better situation, we're only hurting ourselves in the long run. So big goals, man. Big, lofty, presidential type goals I got going on over here.
It's no fucking around for Wil Greazy Anspach over here. Dude, this has been awesome. I've enjoyed this.
Yeah, I told you, man. You pull the string, I'm gonna just run and run.
It's great, man.
I love it. You're gonna have to edit this shit down.
This will be the longest Progressions podcast, even after the edit. This thing is it's gonna be an epic. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe we'll see. But before we go, you have to tell people where they can find you, where they can get on your TikTok, because it is absolutely hilarious and inspiring and disturbing all at the same time. Like, you've really mastered all the emotions in your TikTok. So like, if you're an engineer in this business, you need to get a piece of Wil's TikTok.
You can catch me. I'm on TikTok as Greazy Wil Music. I'm on Instagram as Greazy Wil. TikTok is definitely the place where I am the most vocal. That I have no fear. I've called out clients who don't pay me before on TikTok. I've taken it to Ray J, and been on that. I definitely I have no filter on there, and I do not care what I say. And it started off that way because I was like, yeah, I don't care. It was like the pandemic and shit. I'm like, I don't care. I'm just going to say what I want. But now I'm starting to realize that it's very important for people like myself, especially in the positions that I'm in, to say things and to speak up, because there's so many people out there who don't have that opportunity to speak up. So the TikTok's a great place for me. And again, I am on Instagram. I have a new podcast starting soon with Shane. It's called That Sounds About Right. We're on Instagram as That Sounds About Right Pod. Also, you can find that everything's in my link tree on my Instagram, my website, where you can find me if you actually want to speak to me. I'm well all over the internet. Greazy Wil is an easy person to find on the internet these days. So
it's awesome. That's awesome. Well, I appreciate you taking the time, dude. This was a super fun hang, and
yeah, thank you.